Good evening. I hope all of you are doing well. We are learning Maseches, Yevamos daf Kavches. And this Mishnah, this Gemara that we're learning is an analysis of our Mishnah that we started with at the beginning of the parak. The Mishnah that we started with at the beginning of the parak is the case of the Arba Achim, 4 brothers, 2 of whom had married sisters, and then the brothers who married sisters died, and the 2 sisters fell to the remaining 2 brothers. We'll be discussing an analysis of that case. We're starting about a third of the way down on Kavches Samad Aleph at the 2 dots where it says Tznan. Now, I know that yesterday we had said that our Mishnah was unaccepted by Rav Yochanan. The Gemara is continuing as though that never happened, because according to Rav and according to most other Amoraim, the Mishnah does make sense. And we'll highlight one distinction between Rav and Rav Yochanan shortly. So the Gemara says as follows: Tanan, we had said in our Mishnah that in regards to the case where the two wives who were sisters fell to the second set of 2 brothers, to Levi and Yehuda, we had said that Haisa Achas Mehana Surah al Ha'echad Isser Erba, that had, let's say, Leah been a mother-in-law to Levi, so then in that case, Aser Ba Muter Ba'achosa, then he whose mother-in-law was one of the Yevamos, so he's not allowed to marry her, of course, because that's Erba, but he could marry the other woman who is his mother-in-law's sister. That's fine. But the second wife is Asur B'Shtehen. The second brother is Asur B'Shtehen. The second brother is not allowed to marry either of these women. And the Rishonim explain the reason why that's true is because of the din of Achos Zikukaso. Because when these women fell into Yibum, they were all begeder Achos Zikukaso. And even if it were to be that when Levi, who was the son-in-law, marries the other woman, which is not his mother-in-law, obviously, so then still, even though the Zika bond has been broken, we don't care. The second person is not allowed, this man is not allowed to marry either of these women because of the din of Achos Zekukaso. Says the Gemara, Salka Daitach, I might have thought, that maybe the mother-in-law, we had said that this is Leah in this case, that maybe the mother-in-law became a Yevama first. Says the Gemara, if that's true, that she became a Yevama first, then why then would we say that the second brother, the remaining brother, the 4th brother, I guess is probably more accurate, that we said Levi and Yehuda, why is it that Yehuda would not be allowed to marry either of the women? The son-in-law should marry the woman who is not his mother-in-law, and his mother-in-law should be available to the last brother, to Yehuda, like a Yevama who was initially permissible, and then she became forbidden, and then she became permissible again. She should be mutter. So says the Gemara, you're right that had it been that the mother-in-law died, that the mother-in-law fell by Yibum first, you're 100% right that would have been the case. But that's not what our Mishnah is dealing with. What our Mishnah is dealing with is we're dealing with a case where the non-mother-in-law became a Yevama first, and therefore the son-in-law is allowed to marry the woman who isn't the mother-in-law. But the 4th brother, who was one of the remaining brothers to whom these 2 women fell, he cannot marry any of them. And again, that's Rav Papa's case, where the first person who fell by Yibum was the non-mother-in-law of the 2 sisters, which would be Rachel in this case. So says the Gemara, Rebbe Lazar Omer Beis Shammai Omrim, what was this talking about? That if a person had taka done Yibum in a case when he shouldn't have, there was a machlokas, and the Tanaim, if they had to be removed from the marriage. So Tanya, the Brisa writes 2/3 of the way down, Rebbe Lazar Omer Beis Shammai Omrim Yekaimu, Beis Hillel Omrim Yotziu. Beis Shammai says they can stay, Beis Hillel says they have to leave the marriage. Reb Shimon Omer Yekaimu, seemingly repeating the shita of Beis Shammai, and Abba Shaul Omer Kal Ha'el Lehem LeBeis Hillel. Beis Hillel was the lenient one, but Davar Zesha Beis Shammai Omer Yotziu Beis Hillel Yekaimu, and the Gemara is basically telling a story about Abba Shaul that he said in the Beis Medrash that this machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. What's difficult to understand is Reb Shimon Kiman. Ike Beis Shammai, if what you're saying is that the sheet of Reb Shimon is like the sheet of Beis Shammai and Rebbe Lazar, that was the same sheet that the Brisa opened with at these 2 dots, where it said Rebbe Lazar Omer Beis Shammai Omer Yekaimu. So what did Reb Shimon add? And Ike Beis Hillel, and if he's saying like Beis Hillel, which the language doesn't seem that way, Hainu Abba Shaul, then he's quoting Abba Shaul. So what's the point of Reb Shimon stating his own opinion? So says the Gemara very cleanly, Hachi Kamar. What Rebbe Lazar is saying is Lo Nechlaku Beis Shammai Uveis Hillel B'Davar Zeh. There's the machlokas here. So there's 3 shitas. There's Beis Shammai, there's Beis Hillel, and there's, you guys got it all wrong. There was no machlokas Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. So that's why Reb Shimon's shita is brought here in a seemingly extraneous way. It's really not extraneous, just to indicate to us that in fact there was no machlokas. We're at the 2 dots, Kavches Samad Aleph, 8 lines or so from the bottom of the page. So we had learned our case of Hayasa Achas Mehen, that if one of the 2 Yevamos was a mother-in-law, we had learned, or any other of the Arayas, but mother-in-law is the cleanest of them, that if one of the 2 Yevamos was a mother-in-law to one of the brothers who are now the Yevamim, so then we had said that the brother, the son-in-law cannot marry his mother-in-law, obviously, but can marry the other woman, and the other person gets no yibum. So says the Gemara, Hatanina Chadazimna. We've already learned this case. We've already learned that a son-in-law can marry the other Yevama that isn't his mother-in-law. Says the Gemara, that the sister who is not going to be your erva, she's your yevimta. You can do chalitza or yibum. So why did we need our Mishnah, and why did we need this brisa? Says the Gemara as follows: we did need this. Tzricha diashminan hasa mishum deleika lemigzar mishum sheni. There, when we only have one case of erva, where only one of the wives is erva, there we don't have a gzera about the second person. We're not concerned about misunderstanding the din of achos zekukaso. I might have thought the halacha would have been different when there are 2 ervas. Therefore, we needed both sources. If we only had our case, mishum deika sheni de kamuchach, because we have 2 people, and the 2 people would then indicate that we have a din of achos zekukaso. So that's why one of the brothers doesn't marry. That's why he's not allowed to marry either of the 2 women. Aval hasam over there, deleka sheni, where there's only one case of erva, emalo tzricha. We therefore needed both cases. That brings us to the bottom line of Kav Ches Amud Aleph, and says the Gemara, Isser Mitzvah. Our Mishnah had spoken about a case of Isser Mitzvah. We learned about Isser Mitzvah already. Says the Gemara, Hanami Tanina. We learned this many blot ago on Daf Chav. What did we say? Isser Mitzvah ve'Isser Kedusha choleses v'lo misya bemes. We already had this din. So why do we have the din over there on Daf Chav? And why do we have our din in our Mishnah where it says the same exact line? So it says the Gemara, Hasam, over there, top of Kav Ches Amud Beis, second line, over there on Daf Kav, Isser Mitzvah L'chuda. There we were talking about only one problem with this woman, and that it was a case of Isser Mitzvah. But Hacha, we're talking about 2 women. Hacha, it's Isser Mitzvah ve'achosa. We're talking about the woman who's an Isser Mitzvah, and we're also talking about her sister. And Salka Daita Chamina, I might have thought as follows. Maybe we would have said, Leikum Isser Mitzvah b'makom Isser Erva v'tisyabe. Maybe we would say that the woman who has an Isser Mitzvah would be allowed to do Yibum, Kamash Malan, that she's not allowed to do Yibum. So says the Gemara, why would a woman who has a status of Isser Mitzvah be allowed to do Yibum? Says the Gemara, v'tisyabe. How can that be? If it's true that there are 2 sisters, Kevan demi de Oraisa Ramya Kame, one of the wives is de Oraisa, and Kapaga be'acho zekukaso, and the sister has a din of zekuka, so then how can you marry this particular woman at all? She's Isser Mitzvah, it shouldn't be allowed. So says the Gemara, because acho zekukaso itself, the status of the Isser Mitzvah of that woman is only a din derabanan. Sal kadaita chamina mishum mitzvah, because of the mitzvah of Yibum avud Rabbana, they changed the rules, and they said that in this case, because Yibum is de Oraisa, and Zekukaso is derabanan. So therefore, Kamash Malan, we might have thought that it would have been a reasonable time to do Yibum. Kamash Malan, that you are not allowed to do Yibum. Next, Haisa Achas Mehen, what is this case referring to? So this is referring to another case in the Mishnah where not only was one of the Yevamos a mother-in-law to one of the brothers, both of the Yevamos were mothers-in-law to each of the Yevamos. So let's say that you have Levi and Yehuda, and you have Leah and Rachel. And Leah is Levi's mother-in-law, and Rachel is Yehuda's mother-in-law. So the halacha is that they are allowed to marry those who is not their mother-in-law. That is what the Mishnah said. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Why did we need that at all? Hasu lamali, 5th line of Kav Ches Amud Beis. Why do I need this case? Hainu hach, it's the same case. Mali chad, mali tre. Mali lichad, mali litre. Who cares if one of the Yevamos is a mother-in-law? And who cares if both of the Yevamos are the mother-in-law? The din should be the same, that you're allowed to marry only one of those women, and that is the woman who is not your mother-in-law. Says the Gemara Tzricha. These cases are not exactly the same. Then it's muchach, where then we're not concerned about making a mistake about understanding the halachos of acho zekukaso, because there's 2 people who have the mothers-in-law, and therefore all is well. But in our case that we presented in our Mishnah, the first case of our Mishnah, where only one of the mothers-in-law, where only one of them was, where only one of the Yevamos was a mother-in-law, so then, Eimalo, I might have thought the halacha was different. And what about the reverse? V'yashmin and hacha, if we only had the case that we had presented where only one of the mothers-in-law, one of the Yevamos was a mother-in-law, then then maybe we would have said the halacha would have been different because they're playing off of one another. These two cases are not identical, and therefore we needed both cases to prove each of the cases. And then the end of our Mishnah said, Zohi she'amru, this was the case of Achosa shehi yevimta, choletzes omis yabemes. That's what the Mishnah had said. Says the Gemara, the language of Zohi is very specific. Zohi l'me'ute mai. What can we learn from the language of Zohi? What is meant to be excluded? So says the Gemara, very strangely, l'me'ute iser mitzvah lazeh ve'iser mitzvah lazeh. What we're talking about is a case where each person has an iser mitzvah. Says the Gemara, we already learned about that in our Mishnah, the case of Isser Mitzvah. Why are we learning about it again? Hasu lamali, hainu hach, same exact, mali lechad, mali letrei. Who cares if one woman is an Isser Mitzvah? And who cares if two women are Isurei Mitzvah? It doesn't make a difference. The halacha should be the same. So says the Gemara, 10 lines down, Mahu de Tema, I might have said as follows. Ki lo amrinan uki Isser Mitzvah b'makom Isser Erva. When do we say that Isser Mitzvah is not going to be placed up against the Isser Erva? That's Hecha de Ika lemigzar mishum sheni. That's where there's what to be concerned about for another person. Aval, I might have thought that Hecha de Leka lemigzar mishum sheni, where there is no concern about a second person. Ema lahayu kimna Isser Mitzvah b'makom Erva. Ulahayu kimna Isser Mitzvah b'makom Erva. Ulayabmo. We might have thought that maybe you could actually do Yibum here because maybe the only restriction on doing Yibum in a place of Isser Mitzvah is only when we had a secondary halachic concern. But when we don't have that concern, maybe you can do Yibum Kamash Malan. That is therefore the reason why we needed both cases of Isser Mitzvah. One where only one woman was Isser Mitzvah and one where both women were Isurei Mitzvah. And Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, in regards to our Mishnah, V'chein Tani Reb Chia, and we've learned all of this Gemara before. From here to the Mishnah, we've learned already. One of the cases was the well-known case of the 6 brothers that we learned on Daf Ches, but we're going to do the Gemaras here outside. I didn't do all the drawings again. They're probably somewhere hanging around this room, but you'll hopefully remember some of it. So it says the Gemara, what did Rav Yehuda Amar Rav say, and what did Reb Chia say? Bechulan, with all of the ervas of our Mishnah on Daf Beis, with all of the 15 ervas that we were dealing with, anikore bohenho asura lazeh muteres lazeh. In all 15 cases, I can come up with a case where it's asura lazeh muteres lazeh, that when it comes to 2 sisters who fell to 2 brothers, there is a scenario where one of the women can be married. And that is what our Mishnah had said, and this Brisa quoting as well, that's a case where one of the sisters can have either yibum or chalitza. Now, Rav Yehuda disagrees a little bit. Rav Yehuda metargem mechamos va'elech. It doesn't apply to the first few cases in the Mishnah. That this guideline that you can either marry one, or you can either do yibum to one, or you can either be asura to one and mutter to the other. That's only true mechamos va'elech from the mother-in-law and onwards, and the list of the 15 arayos in our Mishnah on Daf Beis. Aval shisa bave deresha. But the first 6 cases low. My taima. What is the reason why that's the case? Because kevan debito, because the case of the father and his daughter, where his daughter fell to him biyibum, the only way that it's possible that he could marry the sister of his daughter is if there was a rape, if there was a violation. That's ba'onsen hu de mishkachasla. That can't be found in a normal case scenario with a normal marriage. B'nisuin lo mishkachasla. But it's not possible to create this scenario in a way where it was a regular marriage. And our Mishnah on Daf Beis is b'nisuin kamairi and ba'onsen lo kamairi. Our Mishnah is only talking about regular marriages, and it's not talking about women who are violated. That's why are you saying that? Why are you saying that we have to exclude our cases, the first 6 cases of this Mishnah from the rule of asura lazem uteres bazeh? It should be mutter, even in the cases of the first 6 cases of the Mishnah on Daf Beis, because kevan de ashkuche mishkachasla, since we are able to create a case where we see that a father can marry his daughter's sister, which can only happen through a violation, so then iboy be'onsin tehave, iboy be'nesuin tehave, our Mishnah can be a
sister is his daughter.
No, that's what I was saying, is that the mother of that woman was raped and had a daughter who's a sister to his daughter through a proper marriage. So because there was a rape involved, so therefore it's not his daughter. He's not the one who impregnated the mother. So that's what the Gemara is talking about over there. So the Gemara says, you can read our Mishnah speaking about a case of rape, about a case of violation. Why? Who says our Mishnah is not talking about a strange case scenario? Well, I think we've come across a few strange case scenarios so far. The mother-in-law is involved in Yibum. So there's a lot of reasons to assume that there's a lot of reasons to assume that our Mishnah could be this unique case of onsen. There's no reason not to exclude it. Aval, but Abaye does draw the line. Aval Eishes Achiv shelo haya be'olamo lo. But in the case of Eishes Achiv shelo haya be'olamo, there we would not have the din of asura bazeh muteres bazeh. Why? Because kevan de ali b'derab Shimon hu de mishkachas la, ali b'derabanan lo mishkachas la. Because in our Mishnah, the case of Eishes Achiv shelo haya be'olamo is only found according to some of the Tanaim and not other. Our Mishnah on Daf Beis is not dealing with machlokes. For Rav Safra Matargim, he takes it even further. Af Eishes Achiv shelo haya be'olamo. We even could have a case scenario of Eishes Achiv shelo haya be'olamo. We could have a case scenario where even that case has a case of asura bazeh muteres bazeh. Umishkachas la. What is the case scenario? B'shisa ache be'ali b'derab Shimon. This is a quote from the Gemara we saw in Daf Ches, where 6 brothers. So Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun. We're going to go through all the names in a moment. And ve'ali b'derab Shimon v'simanech. How is it that we could remember the case? Here was the chronology of the case. Meis nolad v'yibem. Meis nolad v'yibem. So this is a reference to all 6 brothers in a very, very short, concise reference, where one dies and then another brother is born, and then Yibum takes place for the man who died. So says the Gemara, what's the case? Reuven v'Shimon nesuin shtei achayos. Reuven and Shimon, the 2 older brothers, they marry sisters. Levi v'Yehuda nesuin shtei nochrios. Levi and Yehuda, they marry 2 women who are not related to each other and are not related to the first 2 wives of Reuven and Shimon. Meis Reuven nolad Yisachar v'Yibem Levi. This is the code. It's Meis nolad v'Yibem. So when Reuven dies, Yisachar is then born, and Levi, who's already married to one random woman, then marries Reuven's wife. And then the second part of the story is Meis Shimon nolad Zvulun v'Yibem Yehuda. That Shimon dies, his wife, who is a sister to Reuven's wife, she falls b'Yibum to Yehuda. And then Levi and Yehuda, who now have 4 wives, between the 2 of them, they have their own wives, each of them one, and then each of them have married a Yevama, and then Mesu Levi v'Yehuda b'Lobanim v'Naflu lahu Kamei Yisachar v'Zvulun. And then brothers 3 and 4 die. So now we've had 1 and 2, they died, their wives fell to brothers 3 and 4. And then 3 and 4 died, Mesu Levi v'Yehuda b'Lobanim, and then v'Naflu lahu Kamei Yisachar v'Zvulun. Then these 4 women, 2 sisters and 2 random women, they fall b'Yibum to Yisachar and Zvulun. And we can see a kiyum of what we had said in our Mishnah, that we're able, in fact, to have a case where they can each marry 1 but not both, or they can each marry 2 but not 4. So ask the Gemara just one little detail. Lama li yibem Yehuda. Why did we have to say that Yehuda actually did Yibum? That's some lav dafka that he needed to do Yibum. Below Yibum, Yehuda nami mishkachas. We would also have a case of asur lazeh muteres lazeh, even without both sets of brothers going through this process. We only needed 1 set of brothers. So why does the case have to detail all of them? Mishum tzara, because we had to learn a halacha about the tzara, about the other wife of Yehuda. Says the Gemara, that's great, hatenach tzara, but that doesn't help us for everything, because we know that our Mishnah on Daf Beis had to do with tzara de tzara as well. But we're only talking about tzara in this case. How can you teach me about tzara de tzara? Ma'ikal meimar, says the Gemara, because there really weren't 6 brothers. It ended up being that 2 more kids were born. A family of 8 boys. Says the Gemara, Kigon dehadar v'yabminhu nami God v'asher. And then brothers 7 and 8 were born, and then we have a case of tzara de tzara. We'll stop here at this Mishnah at the bottom of Kav Ches and Beis, and then tomorrow night we'll learn 1 blot. Wednesday morning we're learning Daf Yomi after the early Shacharis. Thursday night we're back in person. Shabbos we're going to learn Daf Yomi after the 2:30 Mincha because of all those Shabbos Agadol drashas, and I think that's it for tonight. Wishing you all a beautiful night.